Hi everyone, and welcome to another live event in the Festival of Nature 2021. I'm Sean McCormick. I'm really happy to be one of the hosts of the festival. It's going really well. We're on day 3 now. And for this session, it's something a little bit different that I maybe haven't thought about very much in terms of nature and its value to us. We're going to be talking to Johanna Ben Blee, who is a research associate at the University of Bristol. And Johanna studied a PhD in biophysics, studying bacterial biofilms, we'll find out what they are, and electrical signaling in bacteria. And she currently works as a research associate studying biomarkers for brain tumors and nanotherapies for cancer. So we're going to find out what that's all about and what is a bacterial biofilm and how do bacteria communicate with each other. So welcome, Johanna.
Hi there.
How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Pleased to be here.
Good. Thanks for joining us. If anyone does want to ask questions through this talk, please feel free to do so. You can just type them in the comments and I'll ask Johanna for you. So Johanna, tell us a little bit kind of the basics first, I guess. What is a bacterial biofilm and why do they exist?
So, most bacteria don't actually exist alone.
Actually, Johanna, sorry. There's quite a bit of reverb on your end. Do you want to just unclick your microphone and just see if it works without the headphones and
yeah.
It's a bit of crackling.
Can you hear me more clearly now?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, so most bacteria in nature tend to not exist by themselves, but they actually exist in these whole communities, which are known as biofilms. And when bacteria are in these communities, they exhibit completely different properties than when they're alone. So, for example, I don't know about you, but if you haven't been to a hygienist recently because of lockdown, you might find that you've got black bits somewhere on your teeth. Those are actually biofilms. Those are bacteria growing in little communities on your teeth. If you've ever left a coffee mug for a while and you get that kind of classic slime on top, that's a bacterial biofilm. And they're like often slimy like that because actually all the bacteria, when they're living in these communities, make this slime. And that substance is really beneficial to the bacteria and protect them. So the same way we tend to exist in communities, and so do lots of animals all over the planet, that's the reason why those bacteria exist in these communities. It really protects them and they can communicate and coordinate their behaviour within it, much the same way we do.
So it's a way of the bacteria almost like connecting with each other and forming a colony or like one bigger unit, is it?
Exactly. And that allows them to do much more than they could if they just existed alone.
Yeah. So your area of research is into kind of how they communicate, is it?
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of my research was into not only the emergent properties of these biofilms and the different properties they have, but also how they coordinate that. So much the same way we need to be able to communicate with each other like we are now to share our knowledge and to actually coexist together, so do the bacteria in these biofilms.
Okay. And you mentioned they communicate like in a couple of ways. One is chemical, one is electrical. How does that happen? Just like what actually happens when they're communicating?
Yeah, so the first way I think we kind of mainly discovered that these bacteria are actually kind of talking to each other was this chemical signaling. Which is known in the field as quorum sensing. And that word quorum means to vote. So much the same way we all take votes on things in our society. It's the same kind of idea, which is that they use these chemicals. And the more chemicals there are, the more of the bacteria around. And it's more likely they'll then want to settle and make this community. So they use that kind of a way of deciding whether or not there's enough bacteria around to actually bother to make a biofilm, for example. And then, yeah, the more recent way that we've discovered, and a lot of my PhD was focused on, because it'd just been discovered at that point, was that they can actually use electrical signaling, much in the same way your central nervous system does, to communicate behaviour, which can be much more of a long-range communication. So that allows them to send signals over much larger distances, and it's much more efficient. So that's kind of the advantage over chemical signaling, I guess. That's where they use that.
And it's really a very kind of emerging area of research. You mentioned before this broadcast that only about 5 years ago it was discovered that they were using electrical signaling. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's very new. So that first classic example was then, and it's kind of emerging more and more that there are probably other ways in which they're going to use electrical signaling. And actually so the ion channels, which is exactly the same as in our cells, how we do electrical signaling. There's loads of ion channels on bacteria that exist that we just have no known root, that we have absolutely no idea why they're there. And it's always been suggested that perhaps they could be doing this in the same way that eukaryotic cells and our cells are known to do. So it's just likely that the more and more we learn and the more we get new ways to be able to actually visualize these bacteria and these biofilms, and the more we understand them, the more types of electrical signaling it's going to be likely that bacteria use.
Okay, so it's an area ripe for research and might occupy your entire career, it sounds like.
Yeah, very easily could.
Yeah. This is going off topic, but, what do your friends say when you start, talking about eukaryotic cells and electrical signaling down the pub whenever that goes back to normal?
I tend to just be like, well, when people ask what I'm doing, I tend to just be like, it's exactly the same as your brain does to talk to each other. Bacteria just do that to talk to each other, and just leave it at that.
Dumb it down a little bit, yeah.
Just keep it simple, especially if people have had too many pints.
Right. But you are a bacteria geek, I presume, right?
A little bit, yeah. But I mean, I didn't really have much interest, or like nobody saw it coming that I would end up in biology. So I think it's still a bit of a surprise to everybody, yeah. But that's what I'm doing.
You're a physicist, right?
Yeah. I was very much, a physicist. I was very much not into. I remember almost giving up biology A level because I very much wasn't into biology at that point. But I think I just didn't really realize what was classed as. But it was very segregated at that point. What was physics?
There's a lot of overlap now.
Yeah, definitely.
Good stuff. So tell us how, this kind of study of how bacteria communicate, how does that translate? How does it help us when we're talking about cancer cells, for example, or treating kind of cancer brain tumors, things like that?
Yeah, I guess kind of more broadly, if I take it back just one step, it's just useful because if we can understand how these bacteria communicate and how they coordinate that behavior, then we can kind of ultimately control them. And there's loads of things that could come out of that. So first of all, like a lot of the biofilms can be bad. So like on our teeth or in the clinic, so lots of infections are biofilms. So we've obviously got a big problem in terms of antibiotic resistance and things like that. So the more that we can understand that, the more we could control bad biofilms. So that would be the initial thing, is tackling bad biofilms in industry or in infections and in health. And the other thing is, like you said, there's lots of cool applications that could come out of it. So firstly, we could actually use the biofilms directly for loads of bioengineering purposes. And the more things that we understand that they can do that are cool, so like electrical signaling, the more we kind of use those properties, and the more that we could control them by understanding those properties, the more we could, for example, make biofuels, or we could extract pollutions, we could degrade plastics, we can maybe even generate electricity and things like that. So there's that kind of bioengineering side of it. Then there's the kind of going back to what the question, I guess, that you asked in terms of nano medicine and things in the future and my current research. The more we understand how these fundamental systems and how these micro collective behaviors work, the more we might be able to use those as well. So, for example, we're probably in the future, and probably not too distant future, going to be using nanobots and loads of medicines that we could actually control to do targeted treatments, for example, inside ourselves. So the more we understand these swarms and these collective behaviors in these natural systems, the more we can mimic them and use them in engineering or in medical purposes.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a lot of avenues of research.
So my experience of it as a vet, with resistant infections or wounds that have formed biofilms over, and it's very hard for antibiotics to penetrate them, for example, if they've got that kind of defensive colonies and things. So you're saying potentially you could get therapeutic agents to an area of the body mimicking the type of communication that biofilms would have, or how they spread chemical signals, basically.
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that side of it of mimicking it, but also by understanding it, you might be able to come up with better therapies to, for example,
to break in.
So in much the same way as, like if we understood that they were using electrical signaling, or for example quorum sensing, which is the chemical one, if we could find ways to block that, or to trick them into thinking that other bacteria are telling them something, or for example, then we might actually be able to do that. And we're actually starting to see in nature that nature might already be kind of doing that with bacteria. So there's some research that's shown that our own cells, on the chemical side, so inside our stomachs, might actually be communicating with these bacteria and sometimes trying to trick them too. So perhaps we're already doing it within ourselves and we haven't actually figured that out yet.
We just don't know. Okay, if anyone has any questions, let us know. I know one has come on from Sally Lee, who said, do different biofilms behave in different ways? If so, what determines their behaviour?
Yeah, definitely they do. So firstly, it will depend on which bacteria it is. So loads of different bacteria behave in different ways. So some, for example, might swim. Some might produce certain chemicals. So that will influence it, the type of bacteria you're actually starting with. And then also the way in which it's formed. So the conditions in which that biofilm's formed. So if it's formed, for example, on a body of water that's moving lots, then it might be particularly well made to resist that. So it might produce more of the slime, which will help it stay secured or anchored. If you produce it with loads of antibiotics around, it might become antibiotic resistant, which is why we have the whole problem that we do. And when they're in biofilms, these bacteria can actually pass on those genes and that information to each other much more readily. So they're much more likely to also become resistant to things like antibiotics because they can share those genes with each other.
Okay, yeah, great stuff. I was going to say antibiotic resistance, such a growing concern globally and in various industries and things, veterinary and human medicine. The other thing I was going to think of is kind of physical products or industries looking at this from a physical point of view of like how to produce adhesives, I guess, or how to have different applications like that in pure physics. Is that something that's been researched as well?
Yeah, definitely. And again, the more we understand about what they can do, the more we can try and use this. So yeah, they already use them, for example, wastewater treatment. They use biofilms to kind of extract stuff there. And that's probably going to become a growing, emerging thing of extracting things. So like I said, degrading plastics, perhaps in the future. But then also they can produce things, like you said. So these the biofilms and the slime that we get in nature are just an example of that. But we can try and make biofilms that will make specific things or make specific things more. So maybe that's medical, or maybe it's a chemical. There's lots of ways we could start to use it. And we kind of got a thing in bioengineering where we're changing these bacteria to get them to do what we want to. So that's very much an emerging field as well. These kind of fake bacteria that we've made in a specific way that we can then make them make what we want them to.
Okay, it's a fascinating area. The other kind of big, not buzzword, but really kind of popular area of research now and kind of extending into public knowledge is the microbiome, the gut microbiome in particular. Is there anything kind of stand out or like exciting happening there in regards to biofilms?
Yeah, well, I personally am fascinated. Like I said, I'm working on brain biomarkers. So I guess the connection between the two and the association that our gut microbiome has on all of us, and probably our whole biome. Like we talk a lot about the gut microbiome, but actually it's our whole bodies. The things that these bacteria that are in biofilms produce and the effect that has on things like our brain. So they're only just starting to really understand that our whole brain development, as well as things that go wrong, things that go right, are really associated with those bacteria. So I think particularly seeing what comes out of there's been big emphasis, obviously, and it's widely publicised in the media about the bad things of our gut health and how that can cause problems. But actually, the beneficial side of biofilms and bacteria, I think that's only really just starting to get researched. And I think that's a really exciting way that we might be able to use and also like enhance our gut microbiome, for example, for our benefit.
Yeah. One of the fascinating things I found is the relationship between mental health and the gut microbiome, that actually bacteria is helping upregulate serotonin production and things like that in the brain. Absolutely fascinating. The gut-brain axis, they call it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very good. There was one last thing I was going to ask, and it's gone from my head now. Yeah, I can't think of it. Are there any other kind of weird or crazy applications for bacterial biofilms that you've heard of, or that you kind of?
Yeah, well, I guess it's one of those things that we're just, yeah, there's so many things coming out all at once that, so I think it was only about a week ago, but they've kind of made a new, they're not calling it a bacteria actually, but it's kind of based on a bacteria, but we've genetically modified it enough that it's not even called a bacteria anymore. So it's kind of like going to be like a biorobot that we're going to use to produce stuff, but they've changed it genetically enough that, yeah, it's not even classed as bacteria anymore. But yeah, I thought that was quite cool, but also kind of scary. Even as somebody who works on things, I'm always like, is this okay?
Yeah, I know in your when we chatted before this, just get to know each other, you talked about bio-inspired robots. What are bio-inspired robots, and how big are these robots? Just visualize for us.
So you get bio-inspired robots, I think, of all scales. So actually, I'm in the swarm robotics group at Bristol. So most of the people in the lab are working on quite large robots, and most of them tend to be based on something in nature that's inspired those. So for example, there's a project, working on basking sharks that have been inspired by that, whether it's drones in the sky, inspired by birds. I think there's always that aspect of nature inspiring it and then us going off and creating them. But we can then use them, these whole swarms can be used in loads of applications. So they're looking to use it for monitoring in the environment, for putting out fires. Those are kind of all the big robots, but then we can actually
New Year's Eve light show with the drones was bio-inspired robotics, right?
Exactly that. Yeah, but then we've kind of got the same thing going on the really, really small scale as well. So you get all these really cool properties that come out of having loads of something, like loads of bacteria, and if we can have loads of nanobots or loads of something that inside our body, then we could use that as well to really do these cool targeted things. So that's the kind of nano robot side of things that's coming out, which we'll definitely use inspiration from bacterial biofilms or from other small swarms, to understand how those could work and how to make them better and find new applications.
Okay, we've definitely got a biofilm bacterial fan in the audience, because Sally has asked again, what about the use of light? Do any bacteria use light to communicate?
Yeah. So there is a loads of ways. So it's been known for a while there are certain types of bacteria that use light and respond to light. It's actually kind of coming out recently. So some of my other PhD work was on this. Actually, all bacteria might respond to light. So that's going to be a really interesting emerging field as more and more types are found to respond to light, and seeing whether we could control them using light as well. So that's definitely an upcoming area of research.
Right. And Sally has also asked, do biofilms have cultures? Which I presume she means kind of culture as in communication and kind of behavioral change. As opposed to bacterial culture, I guess maybe it's about the quorum sensing, that they're actually, forming behaviors collectively, I guess.
Yeah, they definitely have collective behavior, and that's how they regulate all of this. The whole biofilm growth is very much like a whole form of emergent behavior. And like I said, they all have very different roles within it that they actually fulfill. So some of them are kind of persister cells that barely grow, but were particularly resistant to antibiotics. And some of them are these growing cells. Some of them produce more of this slime. So they all have these different roles. And sometimes they cooperate and sometimes they're competing with each other. It's a bit exactly like, us guys are in society. Overall, we're kind of cooperating, but a bit of competition in there.
Occasionally a bit of war breaks out, yeah. Okay, well, look, John, it's been absolutely fascinating. It's an amazing area that I think we all forget about unless we're immersed in that or work in the medical profession. But we have a lot to learn from bacteria for sure. I remember what I was going to ask, which was, you often hear this kind of fact bandied around. Is it true or not? Do we have more bacterial DNA in our bodies than human DNA?
Yeah, this is something that I think overall, having Googled it a few times, the answer is yes.
Okay.
But it's up for debate. It's one of those things that they say they haven't actually fully measured or quantified. I think we still don't understand enough about our microbiome, and the same all over the world. There's meant to be more bacteria than there is of anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, they yet to properly start measuring and quantifying these things. So we shall see.
Well, it's where we all came from, isn't it? Bacterial soup. Yeah, well, great, Johanna. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's absolutely fascinating what you're doing. Where can people find out more if they're interested in your work?
Well, I've got a Twitter account. And then also, yeah, there's some great stuff. You can go on Twitter to hashtag biofilmaware, which is going on at the moment, which is a photo competition with loads of scientists who work in the area posting stuff and their pictures and their work. So that's another great place to go and check some stuff out.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And it's over and out for another session of Festival of Nature 2021. Thanks, Johanna. Bye.